Hello and welcome to Varn blog. And today we're talking about a bunch of things because I've been gone for a month. There's no guest on right now. Guests will start back on next week. You will notice there's increasing deviation from the podcast, the Patreon, and the feed. I'm increasingly doing podcast only stuff on the free version of the podcast. The Patreon's feed this month I've given I think the entire back catalog of former people, including new episodes and unreleased episodes, have been coming out for the Patreon. Some of them are available for free on the Patreon feed. So if you're not a subscriber, you can still pick that up. But I'm here to talk about a bunch of things because a lot of chickens have been coming home to roost while I have been away. And I haven't been doing a whole lot of podcasts lately. I took a month off from everything. If you've been seeing me on Zero Books, it's because those episodes were pre-recorded. So I have been off gallivanting around my home state and spending time with my family. So, what's going on that I want to talk about? Well, I was driving home from getting my cracked cell phone screen fixed today. And because I dropped it on, actually, I didn't drop it on my trip. I dropped it the day before my trip to Georgia. And I was listening to NPR's The World. I don't normally listen to NPR, but I wasn't feeling music today. And since my phone is being fixed, I didn't have anything to listen to the podcast on. So I just listened to generic, basic afternoon, The World. And what did I hear but coverage of the Castillo stalling in the Peruvian election? Great. It's good to hear international news on NPR. And immediately I'm struck with the way NPR approaches the story. It throws 3 seconds devoted to Castillo's stances. It throws about 3 seconds to Fujimori's stances. It talks about how neither one of them are, quote, white. And by that, I think they mean Creole, which would be, a person of Spanish lineage born in the Americas, as opposed to Peninsulares and Mestizo and, indigenous. Okay. So they frame the debate solely around race, talking about how the indigenous are getting a lot of pushback in the stalemate as the coalitionary government is forming. And this is true enough. They didn't have two Peruvian professors who work in the United States come out and comment about Castillo's policies. And they don't say much of anything about what he plans to do, the other parties that he's trying to form a coalition with. They mention that he is a leftist conservative because he holds traditional views on abortion, on gender issues, on sexuality issues, etc. And I just thought I've also discussed this with Camilo Gomez from Peru on a podcast we did in the past, but they didn't focus any time on these policies at all. They also covered that Fujimori was not a Creole either, didn't mention her relationship to the prior dictator, just mentioned that she was Japanese Peruvian. Then they were talking about racial attitudes in Peru and how anti-indigenous they were. And they mentioned that Castillo didn't identify politically as indigenous, but as working class. Actually, that's not even totally true. Castillo does make some emphasis on his indigenous background, but he focuses on class issues. They immediately reframe the election as entirely about race because of racist attacks online, which seem very real. But then I started hearing them talking about like white mestizo and other categories. as if you could take the color spectrum of Peruvian attitudes about race and just jam them in no, they didn't mention that her father was the dictator, and just jam them into an American binary conception about race. And that's all they talked about. They didn't talk about how Peru has had some of the worst COVID fatality rates in all the Americas. They didn't talk about the economic policies prior to this. They didn't talk about how the center-right government has become unpopular with all sides. They didn't talk about any of that. I'm not talking about a podcast. I'm talking about NPR's The World, which is an NPR news show in the afternoon. So they took even the racial content, like what the racial content is actually about, what all the racial tensions in Peru were about, how complicated it is. And they're like, well, there was white supremacy brought in by Spanish colonialists. Okay, true enough, right? But how are you going to explain the category of mestizo white as if that even makes sense? Except by dealing with the fact that there are anti-indigenous and anti-black attitudes, even amongst the mestizo population of Peru, that you have to expand the category of rightness to make this simple binary framework from America fit. Also, all the important social issues and all the important economic issues that are debated in this election, and why they can't seem to form a government right now, and why the coalitions are constantly lifting, are not touched at all. You would learn nothing about Peruvian politics from listening to a 15-minute section on Peru. This is what American liberal discourse has turned into. A decontextualized and quasi-triumphalist narrative about how racism is always with us, and maybe they're right about that, and how that's beginning to end. Maybe they're right about that too, although that's a contradictory statement. But none of the reasons, none of historical development, none of the tensions, none of the reasons why this happened, and it's shown as if it's the same thing that is on that happens in America, that the same context, the same dialogue. Ironically, in doing this, they're also expanding the category of whiteness to people who just don't see themselves in that debate. Even if there is a colorist, to use a framework, an American framework still, but one that is more accurate to what's going on in Latin America, debate in Peru, and there is a history of Spanish anti-indigenous sentiment, but they cannot contextualize it enough. They did talk a little bit how being called Sereno, said you're from the mountains, is a coded way of talking about you being indigenous or indigenous mestizo. That's true enough. I've heard this from multiple people in Peru. And I've had people try to explain to me how complicated Peruvian racial categories are, including from someone I used to date. So an intimate in my life tried to break it down for me. She was also from Peru, and she was born there. Now, what bugs me about this is that you can listen and think you're learning something about Peruvian politics and Peruvian racial attitudes and Peruvian economic attitudes if you don't know anything already. Right? You can think the NPR is contextualizing this for you. It sounds super progressive. And it sounds super knowing. But it just skims over so much. It's the kind of thing that a little knowledge may actually be worse for the average person in understanding what is going on and why the Castillo presidency even is complicated for leftists who follow Latin America, and if it even happens and why it may not happen. They didn't even cover why they're still in a deadlock. They're like, well, they're still counting because of accusations of fraud in the mountains. And they didn't even normally pull their everything's an analogy to Trump card on this. They didn't explain hardly anything. Nothing makes me more angry than mid-wit pseudo-intellectualism, particularly in context of geopolitical complications, because the real world needs to be explained. It needs to be understood, and it's not easy. It can't be done in 15-minute chunks. I say, ranting to you in an 11-minute chunk. So there's that. Anything that you listen to from a mainstream liberal or even a left news source, Jacobin is better than NPR. There are podcasts that are better than NPR on this, but they're not a lot better. All right. In my discussion on This is Revolution before I went on haitus on AMLO, on the same night we did that, was it Left Insurgents or one of the, I think it's David Grisham's podcast, did a pro AMLO pod, just basically alleging media bias against AMLO, not talking about the nature of the coalition he had to form this last time, not talking about the fact that he has had to maintain an austerity government, this, that, and the other. And you wouldn't have got that from Jacobin either. Yeah, Griscom. So what you have to do is, frankly, you should do what I do. One, if you can, learn enough Spanish to read it. It's not a hard language. Quit being a lazy imperialist and not learn a second language, at least written it. Yeah, Left Reckoning. Thank you. For those of you who listen to this when I turn this into an audio stream on the Patreon group, it's Left Reckoning, not Left Resurgence. There's so many left podcasts in the world and left, that it's hard to know. What I will tell you to do is, if you can read international news, not in the English language section if you can. Der Spiegel English versus Der Spiegel German is actually quite different. If you can't do that, most people can't, and I don't want to be an intellectual elitist, read financial reports. I used to say The Economist has declined in the last 10 years. FT and the Wall Street Journal's non-editorial sections are actually quite good. Chomsky's been talking about this for 30 years. The people who do business, Bloomberg can be quite good too. The people who do business will write in code, and there's code things you might need to know about how they're framing things positively or negatively. But they give real news. Why? Because business people need to know what's actually going on. Capital, as someone in the chat is saying, capitalists need real info. News consumers do not. I was sitting with my mother who has cancer when we were watching MSNBC together. She's discovered the world of liberal cable news. And we were watching something on gun control. And they were talking about how we needed gun control expansion, but Rachel Maddow was talking about how they had and caught 300,000 people who got guns without improper background checks, and they had rescinded, they'd taken back the gun or whatever. They did done proper persecution. And then my mom looked at me and she was like, wait, how is this a sign where this law that you were saying works? We need another law to do this. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to say, particularly since, if you look at the gun deaths, that most of them are handgun related, and none of these laws do anything about that, except for maybe some background tech laws. So even my mom sees that even liberal news, which she trusts more than conservative news, and trust is in quotations there. And my mom is, almost 70. And has, she bragged to me that she's never voted for a Republican in her life. Don't take that as a sign that she was a liberal when I was growing up. She was not. So my point in this little anecdote is that even people like my mom who are unwell and who are really invested in an anti-GOP narrative think that there's a lot of fishy going on in liberal media, but they don't know where to go to get information. And it is hard. And it's going to get harder because one of the things that you see in general pushback is the idea that we had too free of the internet, too free of an internet. The internet heyday is over. You're even seeing Biden start talking about the repeal of parts of the Federal Communications Decency Act that would start to regulate the internet and in a way that would encourage private businesses to be very censorious. And like most of the Biden administration, it's framed one way, but is actually likely to lean another. I don't mean to crap on anyone's left triumphalism in regards to the Biden. Actually, I do mean to. Biden administration. But I am interested in how people are missing certain important things from the current Infrastructure Act. And one of the things is the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I think everyone knows we need. The condo collapsing in Florida is going to emphasize that more. It's only plans to repeal part of it, but yes, it repeals the part that removes immunity from content, so you can't hold content providers responsible for things posted on them, which would lead them to being hyper censorious. It would, basically freeze the internet. There's been pushback on this, even from the Democrats, saying that's basically as an international framework somewhat impossible to do. But there you go. One thing I'm going to say in regards to this, so to pull things apart a little bit more, is there's been a lot of stuff in the Biden infrastructure framework. Everyone's been focusing on it, the attempt to include family infrastructure and all that family infrastructure, which, even one of my conservative brothers agrees needs to happen, believe it or not. But in that same push, there's been some stuff that some small leakages of language that should worry people that I'm not seeing anyone outside of the business press report on. I'm going to thank the Regrettable Century community for putting me up to this one, because I hadn't seen this in the news. I was reading the Regrettable Century's Discord, and a Bloomberg article came up, and in that Bloomberg article, there's discussion of asset recycling. So assets recycling is where you can buy infrastructure from the government to reclaim rents by leasing and upkeep. So this is a neoliberal program built on a Fordist program. This is kind of madness. And this is the kind of things we may see under neo-Fordism under Biden, under the Biden administration. But asset recycling basically means that the government can lease out operations of infrastructure to private corporations or to investment firms, and that they can then declare bankruptcy when they need to re-up the infrastructure, just throwing the cost back on the government. Now, this is just two phrases that's mentioned in the compromise. None of it's been worked out yet, but Wall Street is literally circling around it as an exciting way to get more funds, because Wall Street likes government handouts with negligible responsibility. And in many ways, this combines the worst of both worlds from an economic standpoint. This both has the government largesse of a Fordist framework, with still, you know, corporations being held responsible for providing the actual goods. That's part of the Fordist thing, but also with the privatized markets and no accountability of neoliberalism. We are in a time of monsters when the future is not yet born and the past has not yet gone away. This leads me to the current debates on inflation right now in the United States. Inflation is approaching about 5% and may go up. I've noticed a lot of the MMTer saying this is not a problem because there's been significant wage growth. When I actually look at the wage numbers, I find something interesting. Wage growth in America has not happened in 25 years. Most industries have seen, let's say, the industry wage increase is usually 2.5 to 1.5% a year, and inflation is generally 2 to 3% a year. So, what does that mean? I hate most Gramsci quotes, but it's a good one. I'm using it about them, the liberals. I'll flash this up so people know what I'm talking about on the channel here. I hate that Gramsci quote because liberals use it about Trump. Like they want a future to be born, Frankenmonkey 9 says. And, you know, who knows what they want? You know, the issue with inflation right now is something I think is, and also wage increases. Wage increases, the wage increase now from the projected I've seen is approaching 4% a year if the current projections are going up. That's you're seeing, and particularly in lower end work, like services, there's been a massive increase in pay, even in the states like Utah, where we haven't been taking federal unemployment money for 2 months. So that hasn't had a lot of effect on this trend. Now, I'm trying to figure out why. I mean, we did have 600,000 people die in the last year, in excess of normal. And we had a lot of women leave the workforce. And so a lot of those women don't seem to be returning, at least not right now. But and we've had hyperinflation in certain sectors, computer chips, cars, where because of the computer chip shortage, car production is at a halt. There's not enough used cars in the, that are still operational in the field, and you see double and triple, you know, price increases. Timber was actually, we had 5 to 6 years of underproduction. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've been producing at pace, but then we had a bunch of overmilling. But you've seen that shoot up and drop a little bit. But with housing stocks and public infrastructure needed, there are people who are going to try to keep the stock, the mill, and but hold back on release to keep lumber artificially high. You had a huge amount of people who were right at retirement who just decided to retire. And you had a lot of people who worked beyond retirement and low wage jobs who decided that it just wasn't worth it anymore, that it wasn't worth the risk. But no single factor explains why there's such a labor shortage. Now, there's a lot of business investment and growth, but that doesn't explain services. Service labor is somewhat static. And we're not just talking about recovering from, you're now talking about trying to recover to pre-COVID levels, and people assume that would just be easy to do. It has not been. But all this said, we're still only looking at wage growth aggregate increasing so far. The progression so far is about 4% overall, which is under inflation. All right. Now, I don't know what this should teach us about a few things. One, that minimum wage, even when you get it up to 15, is not a good way to handle this policy because it takes political action to always move it. It would have to be pegged to something and automatically go up to be particularly useful. But two, it's going to be interesting what this means for the overall wage market, because it does seem to be where there is a dearth of workers is in areas that are high skilled but somewhat undesirable, such as teaching. But there's been a dearth of workers in teaching now for 5 years. Basically, the last recession got rid of all the excess, and then we hit max capacity for efficiency. And teaching also isn't, properly speaking, part of the commodity circuit or the circuit or the circular circuit. It is non-productive, but socially necessary labor. So the other thing is, though, is that what this tells us is that the market's been able to underbid unskilled labor for a long time, severely underbid, and it was relying on retirements, basically, not people not retiring for whatever reason, are needing extra income after they retire to keep wages down. Furthermore, we've increasingly extended our adolescence for social reasons in a way that we have not been encouraging people to enter the labor force as teenagers. And I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, honestly, for a long time, because competition for getting credentialing has decreased the people's ability to work after school jobs because they need to do all this other free stuff to get a chance to shine out in an overcomplicated and overcompeted college marketplace. Chickens come home to roost. But when I talk about inflation, though, I think the MMTers have a point that the meager public spending we've been getting during COVID, even with the addition of the fairly substantial unemployment aid, is not why inflation is happening now. Those injections of capital were not enough. Most of them went into paying off debt or savings, which may have had a trickle-down effect, but not fast enough to lead for inflation to jump as high as it has. I've been screaming for a year that quantitative easing, inflating parts of the market would eventually have downstream effects, that people would stop just accepting holding all their money in the labor market. And in the case of even private consumers who also had relaxed access to 401k without penalty, you're seeing middle class consumers pull out large amounts of money from their 401ks, which have been frankly propped up by QE, to start doing things like being able to do all these down payments for houses at these very low interest rates. Because the general economy can't handle an interest rate rise, but the housing market is oversaturated and overheated without it, you can expect housing to be a problem for a long time. So we're going to have those issues as well. I don't see Biden really having anything to do with that. I mean, even the public infrastructure is not going to be able to reverse that for the United States or for Canada, which is having similar trends. We have low housing stock. We have jam ups in the market from COVID and the breakdown of the international supply chain. We have interest rates as low as they can be in a market full of pumped up investments from QE for 2 years. And neither the Biden administration or the Trump administration are innocent of that policy. So it is a bipartisan consensus that made this. And yes, we've been doing QE for a decade. We've been doing it en masse for 2 years. QE is why you will notice the stock market no longer corresponds at all to the quote real commodities market. And a lot of that has to do, in fact, it seems to do better. Well, it does better because QE is cheaper. Quantitative easing increases during these time periods. We've been doing QE for 10 years. but you didn't have a bottleneck before, Mark. Mark Owens, who's commenting this, said, we've been doing QE for over a decade. Yes, that's totally true. But we slowed it down for the last 8 years. And we had a bottleneck. There's no place for all that stock market money to go but to increasingly inflate stocks, which means that now that that's ending, people who have got their money in the stock market know they need to invest it in other things or balance it out. Even individuals who are not highly invested in the market and can only rely on 401ks do have access to the relaxations of tax penalty rules during COVID to pull some of that money out for things like buying a home or paying off medical debt, etc. So they're going to do that. I'm seeing people do it. So what I'm telling you is that bottleneck's been released and it's going to send ripples throughout the economy. Plus, wages are rising. That will lead to price increases because the corporations aren't going to offset that totally at their own profitability. I'm seeing articles in Bloomberg and FT basically predict that's what's going to happen. If wages rise more slowly than inflation, you will see something like 70s stagflation in about 2 to 3 years, which would be disastrous for the Democrats. And the Republicans know it. JD Vance is, I was about to make him the face of the dying earth again. JD Vance is running for the Senate, and part of his economic populism now includes planks on decreasing inflation. I also think that immigrant labor explains some of the low-end market, but not all of it. Immigrant labor doesn't explain a lot of the service sector. It's hard to say what's causing all that. For example, there was not massive immigration propping up Waffle Houses in Georgia. But Waffle House now is paying its line cooks $14 an hour in rural Georgia. I don't know if you realize that, but to buy a house in rural Georgia costs about a fourth of what it does where I live in Salt Lake, and it costs about a fourth to buy a house in Salt Lake as what it does in San Francisco. So you can guess what that means relative to purchasing power. The left needs to learn economics, not just of the Das Capital variety, although you should learn that too. You need to learn conventional microeconomics as well. Housing units, tenant units. The question is, tenants unions are very good at marshaling legal resources to making sure the law is actually enforced, but the law is not in your favor. They can't really do much right now. There's no longer the same legal protections protecting them from evictions. And while cities probably don't want mass evictions because they don't want to deal with the homeless population, many areas ignored the CDC's eviction bans anyway, except on federal property where they had to follow it. There are evictions in Utah the entire time during COVID. So, and if there are eviction releases, it was because fear of political backlash for an already bad homeless problem that we have here. So who knows what this all means? Higher education is still probably going to suffer a lot in the coming days. A lot of people I know who are working class, middle class, and I'm using that to mean they're not impoverished parts of the working class. People who are second and first generation college goers have not been able to get into college this year because without the test as a demarcation, they've been relying on the reputation of the schools, and that perfectly co-aligns with money. So my fear is that a lot of progressive policy on releasing test data, not using test data, has led to preferential treatment. But while that may have led to more diverse outcomes in terms of student body racial demographic, it has not led to any it doesn't seem to have led to any increase in economic diversity, which is code word for accepting people from the middle and middle part of the working class and lower into university. It's a big deal. And so here we are. Now, I went through all the economic doom and gloom after talking about the bad NPR stuff, because in many ways we're in a boom. This was neither the abyss some of us were afraid of, including myself. During COVID, I was afraid of long lockdowns leading to massive economic decline. But this is also not the L-shaped recovery that places like China saw. China has is back up on its 6% growth rate, which is good relative to COVID. It's bad relative to its historical growth rate, or not bad, but it's where you'd expect it to be. China is approaching the beginning of the 60s levels of investment. It's easy infrastructure development, which it did do, and we do not do. Things like ghost cities were predicated on growth. They weren't predicated on filling right then. It is going to have problems in the long run because business cycles are applying to it, and it's beginning to follow the same developmental patterns of the capitalist West. I say this on the near the 100th anniversary of the party. It's something people should look out for. This actually, to me, is why you've seen such a jingoistic turn, both internationally and nationally, out of China rhetoric. And you've seen a lot of anti-China rhetoric coming up because the U.S. realizes that China is well positioned to be the co-hegemon and have more GDP than the U.S. very soon, not just beat it out in terms of production, but also in terms of wealth. I don't think you're going to, even though I personally want normalization of relations with China, despite the fact that I am a China skeptic, on people claiming that it is transitioning to socialism. I see no evidence of that, particularly out of Xi Jinping's rhetoric. And I find a lot of the recent debates online amongst the online left and being picked up by Fox News to be an utter distraction from any meaningful analysis of China. If someone wants to talk to about, Chinese atrocities right now, Chinese atrocities in quotation marks, either to deny them or to project them, as this major, near Holocaust-like scenario, they're basically full of poo. China is engaging in a nation-building project. Historically speaking, China was a multi-ethnic, multinational polity. It is still technically a multi-ethnic, multinational polity, but it is very much trying to consolidate its image as a nation, just like the United States did in the 20th century. That's how it should be read. It should not be read as anything particularly evil on the world scale, but it should not be read as anything particularly benign either. Do not be a fool in regards to these stupid internet debates about historical figures and trying to whitewash or completely damify their legacy. Stay out of that. If you have to make a foray into it, only tell the truth about what you know historically. And if you don't know it or you have not been to the area, keep your mouth shut. The last thing we need is a bunch of people who think they know something, who are repeating half-truths, half articulately to half-wits. Don't do it. I get enough crap, and I should get crap. I get pushback when I get statistics wrong, for example. And I welcome that. I call statistics off the top of my head a lot of the time. I'm not often looking at the news as I'm talking to you. If I'm wrong, call me out. I'll admit it in a correction. I also have, conflated things in the past. I'll do that too. I make mistakes. If I make them, I own up to them as best I can. You'll only see me double down when I sincerely think that I'm right. and that I don't think your evidence is good enough. But own up to it. Yeah. See, either the Stalinists painting China as a paradise, or people equating the CCP to the Nazis. Yeah, neither one of those is useful, right? Like, the CCP is not a particularly evil capital. It's hard for me to see how people can argue that it's a super socialist state when it is crucial to the capitalist system. It is the second most important nation and producer in the capitalist system. It's just the way it is. So there you go. But I don't see China as particularly benevolent, and for the sake of world peace, in lieu of massive restructurings of both social and economic system, I would say that all leftists would be good to arguing for normalizing relations between the U.S. and China, because it would be good for the workers in both countries for that to happen. But I think, if you're going to do that, it has to be critically. You have to say what you really think is going on with China, and it's a bunch of billionaires. I have avoided left-wing discourse, though, and I've just been listening to the news, and I came on to do economic analysis. One of the good things about taking a break, I took a break from Zero Books for a month as well, and I have not had to keep up with every stupid Twitter controversy or this, that, and the other during this time period, and it's been refreshing. I encourage people to know what's going on, but to stand apart from the discourse. Yeah, I would also second that person in the chat who says Western left should have solidarity with labor movements in China, and I would totally agree with that. And also labor movements in other countries in relations to Chinese corporations, which is going to be a bigger deal. The last bit of news, I think, is one of the things that I've seen happen is the green left has been marginalized by the return of what looks like anarcho-primitivism. I've seen a lot more books submitted to Zero. I can't really go into detail about that, but a lot of them are repeating anarcho-primitivist talking points, and that worries me. I also think the conceptualization of degrowth, particularly in light of where the damage is going to be, is a little worrying too, because it looks like, developed nations telling undeveloped nations what they can't have when they have massive populations to deal with. However, I do think there needs to be some realization about how bad the climate situation really is. Things are my travel is, I've been to Michigan and Georgia. I'm back in Utah. The weather's just weird. And yeah, so you want to die faster, not biological death. It's character assassination. I'm reading someone who said there's no labor movement in China. There's very little. We read about certain things that are 10, but yeah, they don't go well. Those get characterized as rightist. The Chinese government definitely isn't pushing for labor right now. That's for sure. Will climate change require degrowth? Depends on what you mean by growth. Degrowth in the capitalist context, absolutely. Degrowth in the context of the use of resources and how we expand the natural wealth of the economy, and I use natural wealth advisedly. No. It means of changing what we consume, why we consume it, and why we produce it, which is almost impossible to do under capitalist production mechanism, which encourages waste and overproduction, and then the destruction of overproduction to re-stimulate the economy. It's basic Marxism. Most conventional macroeconomists don't even totally disagree with it, even though they phrase it in different terminology. We do have to deal with the fact that that we are having mass bio change and bio die-off, and that will require massive restructurings of the way we do things, and that will lead to things like having to think about population density in non-urban areas. How do you conserve the use of land and still keep population dense Housing. You can. I've seen it in Korea because of land shortages, and other countries just don't have the land shortages that have encouraged it, which is high rises would, even in a capitalist country, would share public land around the high rises, changes in zoning, etc. But most people don't realize in the United States, this takes a complete revision of zoning, planning, zoning and planning laws. It would also take massive changes in our agriculture and food production, probably relocalizing a lot of food production, but localizing it under current conditions would not be efficient. So you have to really change like how we do things like urban farming, etc. How we get power and how we use power would need to change. But frankly, consumer patterns are almost always a very small portion of overall power consumption and overall consumer use, even if that's, most of this stuff is back end industrial. We just have to rethink a lot of these things. Probably ending a lot of monocropping. It would lead to relocalization of a lot of food. But, I don't think that's necessarily bad. When I talk about communism, I talk about a more localized and a more globalized future. You will notice what is not part of that is thinking of everything in terms of national discourse. I'm going to add a question. Would you consider doing an interview with someone on regards to collapse of someone well-read in ecology? Yes, and in fact, I'm going to start doing more of that in my discussions on anthropology. I'm going to tell you one thing I'm going to be doing on this channel is moving away from left punditry. All right. I'm still going to talk about geopolitics, politics, and economics. I'm also going to talk a lot more about art, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that before I finish off today because I'm only doing an hour for you guys. I got stuff to do. And I'm going to talk a lot more about education. All right. I'm devoting my life back into education in a big way. A lot of people right now are leaving education. I am, sitting on an accreditation board of a school I'm not going to mention. So I am really thinking about those issues right now. And issues of how art and stuff pounds into it. I want more, I keep on getting asked the same questions. Will you come and talk about the PMC discourse? Will you come and talk about class relations? I've become a specialist in this just by reading the categories and going back through the theories and being willing to talk about different theories in different ways. But that's not all that I'm intellectually interested in. Even though I'm writing a book on Christopher Lasch, with Shalom Dantine, and I am now through the readings for the first couple of essays. When I agreed to do this book, I didn't realize how much reading I was going to have to do before I could even set down a word, so that I didn't make the same mistakes that a lot of contemporary pundits are doing, who read 3 books and then start speaking as if they know what Lasch was really on about or the context for how he was writing. A lot of the left fans of Christopher Lasch actually believe paleo-conservative myths kind of perpetuated by his daughter, who oversaw his legacy, because of an interview he gave in Cocoon in 1987, when he said he was done with the left as it existed at that time, so that we could reinvigorate something like a working class traditionalism and deal with working class culture. I do think it was a conservative-ish move, but he also spent a lot of his time writing about how conservatives would look at cultural and economic problems and just lie, and he was still writing that way up into The Revolt of the Elites, a book that was published posthumously because he didn't want it published. All right. These are things that people don't know about Christopher Lasch, but I'm not being asked about that right now. I'm getting asked about Catherine Liu's stupid pamphlet. All right. And in some ways, what I'm noticing that leftists don't realize is the more you debunk something, you debunk it once. All right. The more you go out and speak about the same thing over and over again, you can get into myopia about it, but you also spread the idea by debunking it. All right. It's a bad methodology. So there you go. Would you consider talking to Cotshot? You've said you disagree with him on a lot of things. It would be an interesting discussion. I don't really want to, but I would. I mean, if someone wanted us to talk to each other, we'd talk to each other. I've called him many mean names on the internet, so I doubt he'll want to talk to me. I respect some of his work and hate other parts of it. I think his initial work on econophysics is good. I do not like his labor tokens work. I think there are better frameworks for labor tokens if you have to use them at all. I talked to him. I mean, like, he's not a person who I consider off the, I think one thing, the people I don't like talking to are not even like right wingers. Talking to a right winger who announces what they are and isn't trying to fool you is one thing. It's talking to people who operate under a right wing context but pretend to be leftists. That's what I don't tolerate. All right, because they're going to expect me to defer to them. And I'm not. Whereas when I talk to a conservative, they kind of know that we're going to be in oppositional terms, and they might be surprised by what I say or what I don't say. I've been asked on a conservative show. I'm not going to say which one because I haven't decided if I'm going to do it yet. And I'm not going on to degree or to debate. I think debating conservatives is one of those things where neither side really does very well. And it may spread the reactionary voice and seemingly give it legitimacy. I also think, oppositional ideological screaming matches are not particularly useful, particularly against people with diametrically opposed worldviews. I do think that discussions with people who really profoundly disagree with you can be very useful, even in a mediated format, but you can't go in just agreeing with them if you really don't, or making false concessions to them to be nice for the format. And that's hard not to do when you're trying to be polite on a podcast. And you also can't go in debate mode because everyone knows how debate mode works. It's as someone in the chat says, it's bad performance art. So I always have to weigh all those things out. And so I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet on that one. If I know the conservative, it's usually a bit easier. I know how they're going to act. The interview for Real Abstractions has been recorded. We had a lot of connection problems that day, so that's been thrown over to producer Paul to clean up, and it's taking producer Paul a little while to do it. I have a bunch of episodes coming out in the next week that are backlogged, including some that have not been released on the channel. And like I said in the beginning of this program, and this is a good post to wrap it up, I'm going to be releasing at least 2 or 3 things on the free Buzzsprout podcast only, particularly on arts stuff. I find that it's easier to get some of the arts podcast people and stuff come in. And I'm going to be doing them high art and low art, guys. I'm talking to people about Appendix N literature. I'm talking to people about Gene Wolfe. I'm talking to people about, pretentious art movies. Shallon Van Tyne and the former People crew are going to be regulars for both Patreon and on the main show. More on the podcast, though, because they don't, Shallon in particular does not like having her face out. So there's a lot of that coming up. Also, there's a Discord. Yes, if you're on Varn blog, the lowest patron fee gets you to Discord and issue most of the podcast. If you go on higher levels, you get live streams, and eventually you get to, like, if you're a $10 patron, you get to tell me a topic of a patron only episode, and I'll do the research for it or find the guest. And I do one of those, one Patreon only a month. I don't have enough for that's a problem yet. So those of you who are doing it now, do it now, because eventually there might be enough of those where I'm going to have to raise the price on that. But right now, that's what you get. The Monday and Wednesday feeds here on the tube are always going to be free, even though they might have some Patreon only stuff at the end. yeah, I try to make as much of this free as possible. Plus, there's free bonus audio content for free on the Varn Blog Voice. I find that my audience is actually different on the live streams than from the Voice. And live streams on YouTube my live streams do very well during the live stream. They don't do so well, a few weeks afterwards. And I guess it makes sense. People don't want to watch a Zoom meeting or a guy talking to space where they can't easily see what the commentary. I am going to be talking more about a lot of different stuff, though, because I am tired of left punditry alone. And that's not all I do with my life. It's not even the primary thing I do with my life. And so I'm going to do more of that. And I'm trying to incorporate the stuff I know about education to you guys, because I realize that keeping my professional life totally separate from this doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't want, I'm not going to start saying where I work, obviously, even though this is not secret and I use my real name in both. But, I don't want to bring my day job into that. But there are a lot of things I'm learning and processing and dealing with, and looking at the structure of schools and a lot of misconceptions people have. And I really want to make that available to people for free. Right now, it's something that some people get if they're, honestly, a lot of teachers don't even get this stuff. This usually is the purview of administration. And you know what they're probably going to do with it, right? So, well, I've been on for an hour, and just to tell you guys I'm back. I'm going to be doing 2 streams a week. I got them scheduled out actually almost for the next 2 months. There'll be additional audio episodes and maybe some Thursday and Tuesday bonus episodes. I do have to do work for my day job, so my summer's not totally free. You guys can't dominate my life. But you'll get a lot of that. I would really appreciate it if you guys like and subscribe, not just to here, but also to the Buzzsprout podcast. Because like I said, there is stuff on Varn Blog Voice that I don't do here. And there's stuff here that I don't do there. I'm kind of an overproduction unit. Mortal Science is starting back up. I know I've been on 2-month hiatus, but we have a producer and we have multiple episodes ready to come out soon. So you guys are going to benefit from that. I'm still at 0 books. I'm still doing my Theorizing with a Hammer twice a month, and Pop the Left will begin again soon? ? For a variety of reasons, I can't really speak much on that, but it does still exist and is planned to come on. But I'm also taking some time for me, hanging out with my dog, getting into tabletop RPGs again after not being into them for a long time, having a social life because I can. I've been shut in just like the rest of you for over a year. So I'm going to take full advantage of that. But there will be plenty of material for you guys, and I appreciate it. I particularly need reviews on the podcast and any podcast aggregator. I know it's weirdly capitalisty to ask for, but I need that almost as much as I need Patreon money. So I appreciate that. And yeah. So get the word out so that those of you who appreciate this stuff and can't contribute to Patreon can contribute in other ways, and help Varn Blog go. I really appreciate it if you do that. And I'm glad I'm back. I see you guys again. And I hope you all enjoyed this stream, even if it was not doom and gloomy of the Varn, that I'm just really annoyed with the quote discourse unquote right now. I think I was thinking about this the other day though. When am I not annoyed with the discourse? Like it's pretty much always, and you can get addicted to that like self-righteous annoyance, right? And so I'm trying to push back on that by making it less and less of my life. The last thing I want to be is a person commentating on the commentary. I used to call those the chattering classes, and now I call them the twittering tweets. We'll see. And with that, I'm off. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you have a great week. May all good things happen to you that can. Oh, I got one last question. Do you play Traveler? I used to. All right. With that, I'm out.